Welcome to XRP Pro Ledger, and today we are going deep on the number that changes everything about how you should be thinking about XRP right now. $18.52 million. That is the net inflow that XRP spot ETFs recorded on May 14th, a single day. The same day the Senate Banking Committee voted 15-9 to advance the Clarity Act. And here is what makes that number significant in a way that most people in this community are completely missing this morning. The cumulative total of XRP spot ETF inflows is now $1.374 billion. That is $1.374 billion flowing into regulated XRP investment products during a period of regulatory uncertainty, during a period when the Clarity Act had not yet passed committee, during a period when the full Senate vote had not yet happened. I want you to stay with me through this entire breakdown, because at the 8-minute mark, I'm going to show you exactly what July 4th means for that number, and why the institutions that are already moving $1.374 billion into XRP ETFs are not waiting for the retail market to figure it out. But first, let us talk about what actually happened overnight, because the price action is telling a story that most people are reading backwards. XRP consolidated between $1.45 and $1.48 overnight, after hitting a session high of $1.53 following the 15-9 vote. The market pulled back and went sideways. And right now, on X and across the community, the dominant question is, why is it not pumping harder? I am going to answer that question directly, and the answer is going to reframe everything you think you know about where we are in this cycle. XRP is not pumping harder because the catalyst that drives the real move has not happened yet. Think about what actually occurred on May 14th. The Senate Banking Committee advanced a bill. That is step one of a multi-step process. The committee vote is not the destination. It is the first confirmed checkpoint on the road to the destination. The full Senate floor vote is step two. The presidential signature is step three. And it is step three that transforms XRP's regulatory status from a court ruling and committee advancement into permanent United States federal law. The market priced in step one with a 5% move. It is not priced in step two. It is not priced in step three. And it has absolutely not priced in what $1.374 billion in cumulative ETF inflows becomes when the compliance barrier that has been holding institutional capital back is permanently removed by a presidential signature. Now let us talk about July 4th, because this date is the most underreported angle in the entire XRP story right now. The White House and Republican leadership are targeting July 4th, 2026 as the signing date for the Clarity Act, Independence Day. Think about the signal that date sends. This is not a random administrative timeline. This is a deliberate political statement. Signing the most significant digital asset legislation in United States history on Independence Day is a message to every financial market in the world. The United States is declaring its independence from the old financial system and declaring its intention to lead the new one. And XRP, which is explicitly named as a digital commodity in the bill's base text, is sitting at the center of that declaration. Now let us connect the July 4th timeline to the ETF math, because this is where the institutional picture becomes very precise. Bitwise and Franklin Templeton led the $18.52 million inflow on May 14th. These are not retail investors clicking buy on a mobile app. These are institutional asset managers making deliberate allocation decisions into regulated XRP products. And they are doing it now, before the full Senate vote, before the presidential signature, before July 4th. The question you need to ask yourself is this: if institutions are putting $18.52 million into XRP ETFs on the day of a committee vote, what does that number look like on the day of the full Senate passage? And what does it look like on the day a president signs XRP's commodity status into permanent federal law on the 4th of July? Standard Chartered's published projection for XRP ETF inflows following full Clarity Act enactment is $4 to $8 billion within 12 to 18 months. The current cumulative total is $1.374 billion, accumulated during regulatory uncertainty. $4 to $8 billion is 3 to 6 times the current cumulative total, arriving after the uncertainty is permanently resolved. That is not a community prediction. That is an institutional desk note from one of the world's largest banks. Now let us talk about the supply picture, because the ETF demand math only tells half the story. Exchange reserves have dropped from 3.76 billion XRP to approximately 1.66 billion XRP since October 2025. That is a 57% decline in liquid supply in under 8 months. $4 to $8 billion of projected ETF demand, arriving into a market where liquid supply has already been compressed by 57%. After the regulatory barrier that has been holding that demand back is permanently removed. That compression does not reverse quickly. The whales and long-term holders who removed that supply from exchanges did not do it to sell at $1.48. They positioned for the destination, not the checkpoint. And here is the psychological pattern that shows up at every major inflection point in market history. And it is showing up again right now in the XRP community this morning. When the price goes sideways after a major catalyst, the retail interpretation is always the same. Nothing is happening. The move is over. It did not pump as hard as expected. Time to wait for the next thing. This interpretation is almost always wrong at the most important moments. Let me show you why. The committee vote on May 14th was the most significant regulatory development in XRP's history. The bill that cleared committee explicitly names XRP as a digital commodity under permanent CFTC jurisdiction. This is not guidance. This is not a court ruling. This is the foundation for federal law. And the day after that historic vote, XRP is trading at $1.47, while ETFs recorded $18.52 million in net inflows. And the cumulative institutional total hit $1.374 billion. The retail market sees a sideways candle and asks why it is not pumping. The institutional market sees a buying opportunity before July 4th and adds $18.52 million in a single day. That is the divergence, and that divergence is the discount window. The discount window does not stay open after the full Senate vote. It does not stay open after July 4th. The retail wave that asks why it is not pumping today will be the same wave that chases the green candles after the presidential signature. The early movers do not chase, they position, and the ETF data shows exactly where the early movers are positioning right now. Now let us talk about the full Senate math, because this is where the July 4th timeline becomes a real probability rather than a political talking point. The Clarity Act needs 60 votes in the full Senate to overcome a potential filibuster. That requires Democratic crossover votes, not just the Republican majority. Yesterday's 15-9 committee result gave us the most important data point for that calculation. 2 Democrats, Senators Ruben Gallego and Angela Alsobrooks, voted yes at the committee level, despite over 100 amendment attempts from their own party's leadership. Those 2 votes are a signal. They tell us that the Democratic crossover coalition for the full Senate vote is achievable. They tell us that the policy argument for digital asset regulatory clarity is stronger than the political argument against it. And they tell us that the senators who represent states with high crypto adoption are paying attention to their constituents. Arizona, Maryland, Nevada, Colorado, Pennsylvania, Georgia, all have Democratic senators. All have significant retail crypto populations. All are watching the 15-9 result and recalculating their positions. The 60 vote threshold is not guaranteed, but the path to 60 is now visible in a way that it was not 24 hours ago. And if that path closes by July 4th, the $4 to $8 billion projection from Standard Chartered does not arrive in 12 to 18 months. It arrives faster. Now let me address something that I think is the most important psychological reframe for anyone watching this breakdown right now. The question of why XRP is not pumping harder after the biggest regulatory win in its history is actually the wrong question. The right question is this: why are institutions putting $18.52 million into XRP ETFs on a day when the price is consolidating sideways? The answer tells you everything. Institutions do not buy momentum, they buy value before momentum arrives. They buy when the fundamental case is clear and the emotional narrative has not yet caught up. They buy when retail is asking why it is not pumping. $18.52 million on May 14th, while retail was watching the candle and wondering if the move was over. That is not coincidence. That is the smart money doing exactly what the smart money always does. And the $1.374 billion cumulative total tells you that this pattern has been repeating for months. Institutions have been accumulating regulated XRP exposure through ETF products throughout the entire period of regulatory uncertainty. Every day that retail sale was uncertain, the cumulative institutional total was getting larger. By the time July 4th arrives, by the time a presidential signature makes XRP's commodity status permanent federal law, the institutional positioning that has been building in the ETF data will be visible to everyone. But the entry price will not be $1.47 anymore. Now let me give you the complete on-chain picture that adds a critical dimension to everything we have discussed. The 57% decline in exchange liquid supply since October 2025 is not an accident. It is a deliberate positioning by large holders who understand exactly what the combination of the Clarity Act enactment, the July 4th signing target, and $4 to $8 billion in projected ETF inflows means for price discovery. When you remove 57% of the liquid supply from exchanges, and then you add $4 to $8 billion of new institutional demand through ETF channels, you create a structural price pressure that does not require retail participation to begin. The ETFs buy automatically through systematic allocation processes. They do not wait for a green candle to tell them it is time to buy. They execute allocation decisions based on fund flows from institutional clients who have already made their decision, and those clients are making their decisions now, while the price is at $1.47, while the full Senate vote has not happened yet, while July 4th is still weeks away. The window between now and the presidential signature is the last window where that entry price is available. Now let us talk about what the Bitwise and Franklin Templeton inflow leadership actually tells us about institutional strategy. These are not speculative funds. These are regulated asset managers with compliance departments, fiduciary obligations, and institutional clients who expect professional due diligence before capital allocation decisions. When Bitwise leads XRP ETF inflows on the same day as the committee vote, they are not reacting to a headline. They are executing a pre-planned allocation that was prepared in advance of the catalyst. The research was done, the compliance review was completed, the allocation decision was made, and the moment the committee vote confirmed the regulatory trajectory, the capital moved. That is how institutional money works. It does not scramble after the news. It positions before the news and executes when the catalyst confirms the thesis. And the thesis here is not complicated. XRP is explicitly named as a digital commodity in the base text of a bill that just cleared committee with bipartisan support and is heading to the full Senate floor with a July 4th presidential signing target. The supply of liquid XRP on exchanges has declined by 57% since October 2025. The ODL infrastructure for XRP cross-border payments is already live in over 90 countries, waiting for the compliance unlock. And Standard Chartered has published projections of $4 to $8 billion in ETF inflows within 18 months of full enactment. Bitwise and Franklin Templeton did not need to wait for July 4th to do the math, and neither does anyone else who is paying attention to what the data is actually saying right now. Now let us zoom out and see the complete picture assembling on May 15, 2026. XRP spot ETFs recorded $18.52 million in net inflows on May 14th. Bitwise and Franklin Templeton led. Cumulative total now $1.374 billion. XRP consolidating between $1.45 and $1.48 after a 5% surge on the 15-9 committee vote. White House and GOP targeting July 4th, 2026 for the presidential signature. Full Senate floor vote targeted for June or July. 60 votes needed for cloture. Polymarket pricing full enactment at 70 to 75%. Exchange liquid supply down 57% since October 2025. Standard Chartered projecting $4 to $8 billion in ETF inflows post-enactment. And XRP's permanent commodity classification under federal law is now one full Senate vote and one presidential signature away from Independence Day. The retail market is asking why it is not pumping. The institutions already know the answer. $18.52 million on a single day tells you exactly where the smart money stands. If this analysis changed how you are thinking about XRP, hit like and subscribe. I drop deep dive breakdowns like this twice a day to keep you ahead of the move.